This screencast has to do with division, and division by far is the one that students are making the most errors on and probably have had the least amount of practice with. So it's good for probably all students to review this. Let's take a look at the notes that we took a few weeks ago. When you were dividing decimals, we needed to make sure that we placed the numbers in the correct position, and what that meant was, let's say if you're taking this problem, this number, the first number, is the one that will go inside, and this number, which is called the divisor, is going to go on the outside. So it's just the opposite when you're using a different symbol. So the placement of the numbers is critical. If you place them in the opposite position, they won't work. So then the second thing was that we found out that if there is a decimal in the divisor, we're talking about this number right here, if there's a decimal in that place, we have to get rid of it. We need to move it over. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then the third thing that you need to be remembering is that before you start anything, once you have this decimal placed, if you had to move it or if it just stays the same, the first thing you want to do is bring it up and go ahead and set it on the line. With division, it's very important that you keep things very nice and neat and lined up, or else you can get thrown off. If you have sloppy handwriting, it kind of works against you a little bit. And some people like to do this on graph paper or line paper or something so they can make their numbers line up a little bit easier. And that's absolutely fine if you need to do that. So let's take a look at the first one here. The first thing that we want to ask ourselves is, are there any decimals in the divisor? Now, before we start, let me just remind you, this is the divisor. This is called the dividend. And our answer that we're going to get that comes down here is called the quotient. So you'll hear me using that vocabulary, and I want to make sure that you know what I'm talking about. There's no decimal in the divisor, so we're simply going to do our division. How many times does 15 go into 55? And this is where, if you're familiar with numbers, you're familiar with multiplication, it's a little easier for you. If you count by 15s, 15, 30, 45, you can see it's going to go in there 3 times. 3 times 15 is 45. When we subtract it, we get 10. And what we do at this point, oops, I just broke my own rule. Remember I said I need to first bring up that decimal point? Okay, I wasn't being a very good example there. So we brought the decimal point up, we've subtracted this, and now what we're doing is we're bringing down that 5. Now you might need to go off to the side somewhere and try to kind of estimate or figure out about how many times 15 is going to go into 105. If you do that, maybe you're counting by 15s, maybe you do a little guess and check, you'll find that it goes in there 7 times. 7 times 15 happens to be 105. So when you subtract that, you get 0. And once you have 0 down there, as long as you're not missing a number before the decimal point, once you get 0 down there, then you're done. So our answer to this one is 3.7. On the next one, this is where we have to be careful about how we place these. This is our divisor, this is the dividend. So it's the dividend's going inside, the divisor's going on the outside. There's no decimal in the divisor, so we simply bring this decimal up and place it on the line. 5 does not go into 3, and so that goes in there 0 times. I do want you to put that 0, the leading 0, in front of the decimal point. How many times does 5 go into 37? Well, it goes in there 7 times because we know 7 times 5 is 35. When we subtract that, we get 2. Now, when you were in 4th grade, you probably use this 2 as a remainder, but we are working with decimals now, so we don't use remainders. At this point, what you need to do, there's no number here to bring down, so we need to add a 0 in there and bring that down. 5 goes into 20 exactly 4 times. 4 times 5 is 20, and here again, we're coming up with an answer of 0. We're past We're to the right of the decimal point, so we know our answer is 0.74. Okay, now for the one that many people have trouble with, and for good reason. We have to ask ourselves, is there a decimal in the divisor? Yes, there is. So we're going to move that over once, and we're going to move this one over once. When you move it over, basically what you're doing when you move it over once, what you're doing is you're multiplying both of those numbers by 10. So we're going to put the decimal point up here, and we're going to be very careful how we place our numbers. Okay, so how many times is 13 going to go into 128? This is actually a pretty easy one to estimate because 13 times 10, you know that would be 130. And look how close this is to 130. 128, it's just a little bit below. So that one is very easy to estimate. Then it's going to be 9. It's not quite 10, it's a little less. So 9, and when you probably are having to go over to the side and actually multiply these out. When you multiply those out, you find out that this is 117. So it goes in there 9 times. 9 times 13 is 117, and then you're going to subtract this. That's a 1, and that's a 1. The next thing that we do is, I'm going to switch colors here. We bring this 3 down. Now, I like to show my work because this helps me figure out, helps me to estimate on the next one, how many times will 13 go into 113. I can see it's going to be a little less than this one. Now this one, 13 times 9 was 117, so I can pretty much estimate that the next number is going to be 8. And you might want to check that. 13 times 8, that's 24, and that's 10. So now we have 104. And what we did was we said 8 times 13 is 104. Now we have to subtract these, and when we subtract them, we get a 9. Now it's time to bring that 1 down. Bring the 1 down. And we're going to see how many times 13 will go into 91. Here again, if you look at your work here, 13 times 8 was 104. 91's not too much less than that. So I'm going to try 13 times 7. Take the next factor down. 7 times 3 is 21. 7 times 1 plus 2 is 9. So it actually equals 91 exactly. When I subtract that, I get a 0. And, whoops, I forgot to put down, let's see. We didn't write down, then it goes in there 7 times. Remember, we multiplied it over here, and then that's 7. 13 goes into 91 7 times. 7 times 13 is 91, so we subtract that and we get a 0. So our answer is 9.87. Be very careful where you're placing your numbers. Let's look back at the first one. When we were saying how many times does 13 go into 128. Let me just erase this right here. Oops, eraser's not working. Erase this right here. When we said how many times does 13 go into 128, we put the number right above the 128, okay? Right there. You don't want to place it here or here. It goes right above that 128, all the way to the right of 128 right there. Okay, so let's take a look at the next 2 division problems on here. With this one, we are having to move the decimal in the divisor twice. That means you're multiplying it by 100. When you do it to the divisor, you have to also do it to the dividend. And we ran out of numbers. But we know that 5.2 is the same thing as 5.20. 2 tenths is equal to 20 hundredths. So we can put a 0 there, and it doesn't change the value of that number. So we'll go ahead and put our 0 there. I'm going to pull this line over here, and we're going to put our decimal point up there before we do anything. So this is where it's really important to line your numbers up very nicely. Will 8 go into 5? No. Will 8 go into 52? Yes. 8 goes into 52 6 times. Now notice I'm putting it right above that 52. Putting it right above there. Okay, 6 times 8 is 48. When I subtract it, I get 4. This is where knowing your multiplication tables really helps. Bring down the 0. 8 goes into 40 5 times. Now the 5 goes right there. Notice that it's right in front of the decimal point. That's where lining your numbers up is really important. 5 times 8 is 40. When I subtract those, I get a 0. And since I don't have any more spaces to the left of the decimal point, I'm done. So my answer is 65. We did this one under the multiplication screencast. Now we'll look at number 15, the last one. Remember, our divisor is on the outside. Our dividend is on the inside. I actually like this problem because when you move the decimal over once, it makes me think of money, and it's easy for me to count by quarters. If you think of this dividend as 25, think of it as quarters. It makes it a little easier to do the math. Okay, will 25 go into 8? No. Will 25 go into 84? Yes, it goes in there 3 times. So think of 3 quarters. 3 times 25 is going to be 75 cents, right? When you subtract that, you're going to get a 9. You had to regroup here a little bit. You get a 9, and then you're going to bring down that 5. 25 goes into 95. Boy, that 95 is almost $1, but it's not quite. So it goes in there 3 times. And we know 3 times 25 is 75. Subtract it, and we get 20. We've run out of numbers to bring down, but that's okay. We can add a 0, bring that 0 down. 25 goes into 200, or think of $2. It goes in there 8 times. 8 times 25 is 200, and I subtract that, get a 0, and I'm done. So the answer to this one is 3.38. I hope that helps you with your division. If there's any part of that that was confusing, back up and listen to it again.